Blood pooled on the mahogany table as Min-Jae Kim pressed his hand against the wound in his abdomen. His breathing coming in short, painful bursts. The conference room emptied in seconds, his most loyal men vanishing like shadows. Following the sharp command, he hissed through clenched teeth, "Get out, everyone!" Only one person remained. Nyla, the maid everyone treated as invisible, the one who served tea in silence while he negotiated blood deals. Her steps were deliberate toward the door, but not to leave, to lock it. When she turned around, there was something different in her dark eyes, something that didn't match the impeccable black uniform. "You shouldn't be here," Min-Jae growled, his hand reaching for the gun at his waist. But Nyla was already opening a medical kit that appeared from nowhere, surgical instruments gleaming under the cold light. "Who the hell do you think you are?" She didn't answer. She simply pulled on surgical gloves with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Min-Jae realized then he had never hired this woman, and she definitely wasn't just a maid. If you're already hooked by this dangerous romance, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, this story gets even more intense. 3 weeks earlier, Nyla Reyes stood outside the wrought iron gates of the Kim estate in Koreatown, her black duffel bag clutched in her hand, like a lifeline. The sprawling mansion rose before her, all glass and steel and money, a fortress disguised as a home. She'd taken 2 buses and walked half a mile to get here, her interview scheduled for 8 in the morning sharp. The security guard at the gate looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "Name?" "Nyla Reyes. I'm here for the housekeeper position." He made a call, spoke in rapid Korean, then waved her through without another word. The gate slid open with a mechanical hiss, and Nyla walked up the curved driveway, her worn sneakers silent against the pristine pavement. Everything about this place screamed wealth. The manicured gardens, the fountain with its bronze dragon sculpture, the fleet of black SUVs parked in perfect formation. She'd prepared for this moment for 2 years. 2 years of research, of infiltration, of becoming someone else. 2 years since she'd buried her father in an unmarked grave because Min-Jae Kim's organization had left his body in an alley like trash. The front door opened before she could knock. An older Korean woman stood there, her grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression efficient. "You're punctual. Good. I'm Mrs. Choi, head of household staff. Follow me." The interior was even more impressive. Marble floors that reflected light like water, art that probably cost more than Nyla would earn in a lifetime, furniture that looked too perfect to actually use. Mrs. Choi led her through a maze of corridors, speaking in clipped sentences. "Mr. Kim values discretion above all else. You see nothing. You hear nothing. You speak to no one about what happens in this house. Understood?" "Understood. The work is demanding. You'll be responsible for the private quarters, the conference rooms, serving during meetings when required. The pay is generous, but the expectations are absolute." Mrs. Choi stopped outside a set of double doors. "He'll want to see you before we finalize anything." Nyla's heart kicked against her ribs, but her face remained calm. This was it, the moment she'd been planning for. Mrs. Choi knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting for an answer. Min-Jae Kim stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands in the pockets of his charcoal suit. He was tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled the expensive fabric perfectly. His dark hair was styled back from a face that was all sharp angles and harder edges. A thin scar ran along his left jaw, the only imperfection in otherwise ruthless features. When he turned to look at her, his eyes were the color of black coffee, and just as cold. "This is Nyla Reyes, sir, for the housekeeper position." Min-Jae's gaze moved over Nyla like a searchlight, assessing, calculating. She stood straight, meeting his eyes without flinching even as every instinct screamed to look away. This was the man who'd ordered her father's death. This was the man she'd sworn to make pay. "References?" Mrs. Choi handed him a folder. Nyla had forged every document herself. 3 years of household experience with a wealthy family in San Francisco, impeccable recommendations, a background check that would hold up to scrutiny. She'd been meticulous. Min-Jae flipped through the pages without expression. You understand the nature of this household? I understand discretion, Mr. Kim. Discretion. He handed the folder back to Mrs. Choi. That's a polite word for it. He studied Nyla for another long moment, and she wondered if he could see through her, if somehow he knew. But then he nodded once, sharply. 2-week trial. If Mrs. Choi has no complaints, the position is permanent. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. This isn't an easy house to work in. He turned back to the window, dismissing them both. Mrs. Choi gestured for Nyla to follow, and they left the office in silence. Over the next 3 weeks, Nyla became invisible. It was easier than she'd expected. The men who filled this house with their expensive suits and concealed weapons looked right through her as she served coffee, as she cleaned, as she moved like a ghost through their world. She learned the rhythms of the Kim empire, the early morning meetings, the late-night arrivals, the coded phone calls, the briefcases that were never left unattended. She learned that Min-Jae had a younger sister, Soo-jin, who visited every Sunday for lunch, her innocence jarring against the violence that soaked into these walls. She learned that his second-in-command, Kang Ji-hoon, smiled too much and watched Min-Jae with eyes that calculated angles. She learned that Min-Jae himself was a man of rigid routine, up at 5 for a brutal workout, coffee black and scalding, meetings conducted in Korean, Russian, or English depending on who sat across from him, and she learned to hate him more efficiently. Every polite nod, every curt order, every moment she had to bow her head and pretend to be something less than she was, it all fed the fire that had been burning since the night the police came to her door with news of her father's death. But she also noticed things she hadn't expected. The way Min-Jae's jaw tightened when his men reported violence. The way he always asked Mrs. Choi about her grandchildren. The way he'd intervened when one of his men got too rough with a driver who'd made a mistake. Those moments confused her. They didn't fit the monster she'd constructed in her mind. It was the third Friday night when everything changed. Nyla was serving tea during what she'd been told was a routine meeting. Min-Jae, Kang Ji-hoon, and 3 Russian men in leather jackets and permanent scowls. She moved around the table with practiced efficiency, pouring from the silver service, her eyes down. The tension in the room was different tonight, sharper. The Russians kept glancing at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Kang was sweating despite the air conditioning, his usual smile nowhere in sight. Min-Jae sat at the head of the table, utterly still, his voice low and controlled. The shipment was 50 kilos short. That's $5 million, Dmitri. So I'll ask you one more time. Where is my product? The largest Russian leaned forward. Perhaps you should ask your own people about loyalty, Kim. Perhaps your house isn't as secure as you think. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Nyla saw Min-Jae's hand move almost imperceptibly toward his waist. And then she saw something else. Kang's eyes darting to the Russians, a barely perceptible nod. It happened fast. The Russian pulled a gun. Min-Jae was faster, his own weapon clearing leather in a blur. Shots exploded in the confined space, deafening. Nyla dropped the tea service and dove behind a cabinet, her training overriding her cover story. 2 of Min-Jae's guards rushed in from the hallway. More gunfire, screaming in Russian and Korean. When the smoke cleared 30 seconds later, the Russians were dead or dying on the imported carpet. But Min-Jae was leaning against the table, his hand pressed to his abdomen, blood seeping between his fingers. Kang stood frozen by the door, his face pale. Min-Jae's eyes found him, and something murderous flashed there. "Get them out," he said through gritted teeth. "Everyone, now!" "Boss, you need out!" The command was a roar that rattled the windows. His men scrambled to obey, dragging bodies disappearing like smoke. Kang was the last to go, backing toward the exit with his hands raised. And then it was just Nyla, still crouched behind the cabinet, and Min-Jae bleeding out in his $1,000 suit. His eyes found hers. "You too. Get out." Nyla stood slowly. Her hands were steady. This was the moment. This was what she'd been waiting for. Him vulnerable, him dying. She could walk away. Let him bleed out on his expensive carpet. Justice served, but her feet carried her to the door, and instead of leaving, she turned the lock. Min-Jae's gun came up, aimed at her chest despite the way his hand shook. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Nyla walked to where she'd hidden her duffel bag behind the bar, the one she'd stashed there 2 weeks ago for exactly this kind of emergency. When she unzipped it, the medical kit gleamed under the cold overhead lights. Surgical instruments, sutures, antibiotics, everything she needed. She pulled on surgical gloves with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in field hospitals, in combat zones, in places where death was a constant companion. "You shouldn't be here," Min-Jae growled, but his gun was lowering, shock overriding his training. Nyla pulled a chair close and knelt in front of him, her eyes meeting his. "You're going to pass out in about 3 minutes if I don't stop that bleeding, so you have 2 choices. You can shoot me, or you can let me save your life." "Who the hell are you?" Her smile was blade sharp. "Right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and death, Mr. Kim, so sit back and let me work." She cut away his shirt with surgical scissors, revealing the wound, a through and through in the lower left abdomen, missing anything vital by inches. Lucky. She'd seen men die from less and survive from worse. "This is going to hurt," she said, and pressed gauze against the entry wound. Min-Jae's jaw clenched, but he didn't make a sound. His eyes never left her face as she worked, questions piling up behind that cold gaze. She could feel his scrutiny like a physical weight, but her hands remained steady, moving through the steps with muscle memory. Clean the wound, check for debris, assess internal damage, apply pressure, prepare to suture. "You're no maid," he said through gritted teeth. Nyla threaded the needle, her eyes focused on her work. "And you're no saint who killed my father," she said softly. The words were out before she could stop them, raw and true. Min-Jae went very still. "What did you say?" She met his eyes, and for the first time since entering this house, she let him see the fire underneath. "David Reyes. Does that name mean anything to you? Or was he just another body in a long list?" Recognition flickered across Min-Jae's face, followed by something that might have been regret. "The deserter 3 years ago. He was my father." Her hands continued working even as her voice shook with controlled rage. "And your people dumped him in an alley like garbage. So you came here for revenge. I came here for answers." She pulled the suture tight, watching him wince. "And maybe justice." "By saving my life." He laughed, the sound bitter. "That's a strange way to get revenge. I haven't decided yet if you deserve to die." The admission surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. She wrapped gauze around his middle, securing it with medical tape. "There, that'll hold until you can get to a real hospital." Min-Jae caught her wrist as she moved to stand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man who'd been shot. "Why didn't you let me bleed out?" Nyla looked at their joined hands, at the blood that stained both of them now, and wondered the same thing. She should have walked away. Should have let justice take its course, but something had stopped her, some instinct that whispered there was more to this story than she knew. "Because," she said finally, meeting those dark eyes, "I'm not like you. I don't let people die when I can save them, even people who might deserve it. Everyone deserves a chance to explain." She pulled her wrist free and began packing up her supplies. "So explain, Mr. Kim. Tell me why my father had to die." Min-Jae studied her for a long moment, and she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Trust or terminate, save himself or save her. The decision would determine everything that came next. Finally, he spoke. "Your father was a deserter from the South Korean military. He came to LA with information, troop movements, security protocols, things that could get a lot of people killed. He tried to sell that information to the highest bidder. My family's organization operates in gray areas, Miss Reyes, but we don't traffic in treason. So you killed him. I gave the order to bring him in for questioning, to figure out who he was working with, who he'd already sold to." Min-Jae's jaw tightened. "But someone else got to him first. By the time my men arrived, he was already dead." Nyla's hands stilled. "You're lying." "I have no reason to lie. Not now." He gestured to the carnage around them. "You just saved my life despite wanting me dead. The least I owe you is the truth." "Then who killed him?" Min-Jae's eyes moved to the door, to where Kang had stood moments before. "I've been wondering that myself for 3 years. Tonight gave me some clarity. The pieces were clicking together. The Russians' ambush, Kang's nervous behavior, the setup written all over this entire meeting. Someone in Min-Jae's organization had been working against him. And if that someone had also been working 3 years ago... Kang, she breathed. He's been too eager to expand our Russian connections, too willing to make concessions, too convenient. Min-Jae tried to stand and nearly fell. Nyla caught him, taking his weight without thinking. He's been playing a long game. You need a hospital. I need to know if you're going to try to kill me again once I'm unconscious. His smile was bitter, pained. Fair question, considering. Nyla looked at this man, this mafia boss, this killer, this complicated knot of contradictions, and made a decision that would change everything. I'm not going to kill you tonight, Mr. Kim, but I'm also not done with you. If what you're saying is true, then Kang Ji-hoon murdered my father and framed you for it, which means he's my target now, not you. Partners then, at least until we deal with our mutual problem. Partners is a strong word. Let's call it a temporary alliance. Min-Jae held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Nyla took it. His palm was warm against hers, calloused, strong despite his injury. It was the handshake of equals, of warriors, of two people bound by blood and betrayal into something neither of them fully understood yet. What Nyla didn't know then was that this moment, this choice to save instead of condemn, would lead her down a path far darker and more complicated than simple revenge. She didn't know that Min-Jae Kim would become her obsession, her salvation, and her damnation all at once. She didn't know that love and hate could exist in the same heartbeat, or that she was standing on the edge of a war that would consume them both. All she knew was that the man bleeding against her shoulder wasn't the monster she'd expected, and that terrified her more than any gun ever could. Min-Jae refused the hospital. Instead, Nyla found herself in his private quarters on the 3rd floor of the mansion, a space she'd never been allowed to enter before. It was surprisingly austere, a massive bed with black silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, a desk covered in papers and ledgers, no photographs, no personal touches, just the functional space of a man who didn't allow himself comfort. She got him onto the bed and checked his vitals. His pulse was steady, blood pressure holding. The sutures would hold if he didn't do anything stupid, like try to run his criminal empire while recovering. You should rest, she said, packing away the last of her supplies. I should figure out what the hell to do with you. Min-Jae's eyes tracked her movements. You're either the best asset I've ever found or the biggest threat to walk through my door. Can't I be both? A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Where did you learn to do that? The medical work. Nyla hesitated. Giving him information was dangerous. But if they were going to work together, even temporarily, he needed to understand what she was capable of. U.S. Special Forces combat surgeon. I did 3 tours, Afghanistan, Syria, classified locations I can't name. Min-Jae's eyebrows rose. Special Forces doesn't usually end up serving tea in Koreatown. I left after my father died. Came back to the States to find out what happened to him. She met his eyes. And here we are. Here we are, he echoed. A soldier playing Maid and a mobster bleeding on his own bed. Strange alliances. Tell me about Kang. Nyla pulled a chair close, settling in. If he's been working against you, why haven't you seen it before? Min-Jae's expression darkened. Because he's good. Kang came up through the ranks with me. We were kids together in Seoul, came to L.A. around the same time. I trusted him like a brother. That kind of trust makes you blind. And now? Now I see the pattern. The deals that went wrong, the shipments that disappeared, the rivals who seemed to know our moves before we made them. I thought we had a leak. I never considered it might be him. He shifted on the bed, wincing. He wants my position, my territory, and he's willing to burn everything to get it. Including making deals with Russians. Russians, Chinese, anyone who'll give him leverage. Min-Jae's jaw clenched. And now he knows I'm wounded. He'll move fast. As if summoned by the words, Min-Jae's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He reached for it, scanned the screen, and his face went stone cold. What is it? My sister. He was already trying to sit up, every movement careful around his injury. She's not answering her phone. She always answers. Nyla felt ice slide down her spine. You think Kang... I know Kang. Min-Jae was on his feet now, swaying slightly. Soo-jin is the only weakness I've ever shown. He'll use her to force me out, to take control while I'm compromised. I need to get to her campus. You need to stay in bed before you tear those sutures. Then I'll bleed. His voice was flat, absolute. She's my responsibility. My brother made me promise. He stopped. Something raw flashing across his face. I'm going. Nyla made a decision. She stood, blocking his path. Then I'm coming with you. You can barely stand, and if this is a trap, you'll need someone who can actually shoot straight. I don't need... Yes, you do. She crossed her arms. Your pride is going to get you killed, Mr. Kim. And then who protects your sister? The logic hit home. She watched the calculation in his eyes, the warrior's assessment of assets and risks. Finally, he nodded. You know how to handle a gun. I'm Special Forces. What do you think? 20 minutes later, they were in one of Min-Jae's SUVs, racing through the late-night LA streets toward UCLA. Nyla drove while Min-Jae made calls in rapid Korean, his voice controlled but urgent. She caught enough words to understand. He was calling in favors, mobilizing his people, setting up a perimeter. Soo-jin's apartment was dark when they arrived, too dark. The door was unlocked, swinging open at Min-Jae's touch. Inside, the space had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, drawers emptied, signs of a struggle. And on the kitchen counter, a phone. Soo-jin's phone. The screen cracked. A message displayed in Korean. Min-Jae's face went white. He has her. What does it say? It says if I want her back alive, I meet him tomorrow night, alone, at the old casino on 7th Street. His hands were shaking, the first real emotion she'd seen crack through his control. It says if I bring anyone, she dies. Nyla put a hand on his arm. We'll get her back. We. He looked at her like he'd forgotten she was there. This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you told me Kang killed my father. She squeezed his arm once, firmly. And whether you like it or not, you need me. So let's stop pretending you're going to do this alone and start planning. For a moment she thought he'd argue, but then something shifted in his expression. Not trust, not quite, but the recognition that she was right. That pride and independence would only get his sister killed. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, we plan. They went back to the mansion, to Min-Jae's private office, where maps and schematics covered the walls. The old casino was a Black Dragon property, abandoned for 5 years after a raid but never sold. Min-Jae knew every entrance, every camera blind spot, every structural weakness. He'll expect me to come in the front, Min-Jae said, marking the map. But there's a service entrance here on the east side, used to be for deliveries. If you can get in there while I'm making the approach, I can provide cover from an elevated position. Nyla studied the layout. This balcony overlooking the main floor, can you get me there? The fire escape on the north side connects. But Nyla... He turned to face her fully. If this goes wrong, if Kang has more men than we expect, I need you to get Soo-jin out, not me. Her. Promise me. The intensity in his eyes was almost painful to meet. This was what drove him. Not power, not money, but this bone-deep need to protect what remained of his family. It made him human in a way she hadn't wanted to see. I promise, she said, but we're all getting out alive. That's the better plan. Min-Jae's mouth quirked. You always this optimistic? I'm Special Forces. We don't do pessimism. The next day passed in tense preparation. Nyla cleaned and checked weapons, a Glock 19 for herself, backup magazines, a combat knife strapped to her thigh. She dressed in black tactical gear, her hair braided tight. Min-Jae moved through the house like a caged tiger, his wound clearly bothering him, but his focus absolute. At sunset, Mrs. Choi cornered Nyla in the hallway. You're going with him. It wasn't a question. Nyla nodded. The older woman's expression was unreadable. I've worked for this family for 20 years. I knew his brother. His parents watched Min-Jae grow from an angry boy into the man he is now. He's not a good man, Miss Reyes, but he's not the monster people think either. I'm starting to understand that. Soo-jin is the only light left in his life. If something happens to her. Mrs. Choi didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Bring them both back. At midnight, they drove to the casino in silence. The building loomed against the night sky, dark and abandoned, graffiti covering the lower walls. Min-Jae parked 2 blocks away, and they approached on foot. "You remember the plan?" he asked, checking his gun one last time. "I remember. You walk in, create a distraction, I take position and provide overwatch. We get Soo-jin and get out." "And if Kang tries to kill me?" Nyla smiled grimly. "Then he discovers I'm a very good shot." They separated at the building's edge. Nyla found the fire escape exactly where Min-Jae had indicated, the metal rusted but solid. She climbed quickly, silently, years of training guiding her movements. The balcony was dark, offering perfect concealment and a clear view of the casino floor below. Min-Jae entered through the front doors exactly on time. The main floor was illuminated by portable lights, throwing harsh shadows across the space. Kang Ji-hoon stood in the center, flanked by 6 men, 3 Korean, 3 Russian, and tied to a chair beside him, gagged and terrified, was Soo-jin. "Right on time," Kang called out, his voice echoing. "I've always appreciated your punctuality." Min-Jae. "Let her go." Min-Jae walked forward, his hands visible, his gun holstered. "Your problem is with me, not her." "But she's such effective leverage." Kang circled Soo-jin's chair like a predator. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? The way you went soft, the way you started questioning our expansion, the way you refused deals that would have made us all rich. You're weak, brother. And weakness is a liability." From her position, Nyla sighted down her weapon, marking targets, calculating angles. 6 men. Min-Jae wounded, Soo-jin in the line of fire. The odds were terrible. "I gave you everything," Min-Jae said, and there was genuine pain in his voice. "I trusted you. And I used that trust." Kang's smile was vicious, just like I used that deserter 3 years ago. David Reyes, he was so eager to sell his information, so desperate for money. I bought his secrets, then killed him and made it look like your order. Insurance, in case I ever needed leverage against you. Nyla's finger tightened on the trigger. There it was, confirmation, confession, the truth she'd been hunting. Her father had been a pawn in Kang's game, nothing more. "And now you're going to sign over your territory, your operations, everything." Kang pulled out a gun, pressed it to Soo-jin's temple. "Or I paint these walls with her brain. Your choice, brother." Min-Jae's hands clenched. Nyla could see the calculation in his posture. He was preparing to move, to sacrifice himself for his sister. Noble and stupid, and exactly what Kang wanted. Time to change the game. Nyla fired. The first shot took out the light directly above Kang, plunging half the floor into darkness. Chaos erupted. She fired again, taking down one of the Russians. Min-Jae drew his weapon, moving with lethal speed despite his injury. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Nyla dropped 2 more of Kang's men from her perch, her training guiding every shot. Below, Min-Jae fought with brutal efficiency, his movements precise and deadly. But she saw him stumble, saw blood spreading across his shirt. The sutures had torn. Kang grabbed Soo-jin, using her as a shield, dragging her toward a back exit. Nyla couldn't get a clean shot. She abandoned her position, vaulting over the balcony railing and dropping to the floor below in a controlled fall that her body screamed at. She came up running, chasing Kang into the casino's back corridors. She found them in the old counting room, Kang with his gun to Soo-jin's head, backing toward a door. When he saw Nyla, his eyes widened. "The Maid? You brought the fucking Maid as backup?" "Former Special Forces," Nyla corrected, her weapon trained on his center mass. "And you killed my father, so this is personal." David Reyes. Kang's laugh was ugly. "That fool was going to get himself killed anyway. I just expedited the process. Let the girl go. This is between us." "I don't think so." Kang pressed the gun harder against Soo-jin's temple, making her whimper. "Drop your weapon or she dies. I'll count to 3. 1... Nyla dropped her gun, kicked it away, raised her hands. Okay, just don't hurt her." Kang's smile was triumphant. "That's better. Now get on your..." Nyla moved, Her hands flashed to the combat knife strapped to her thigh, drawing and throwing in one fluid motion. The blade buried itself in Kang's shoulder, making him jerk back. His gun went off, the shot going wide. Soo-jin screamed and fell to the floor. Nyla was on Kang before he could recover, her fists and elbows striking with military precision. But he was bigger, stronger, and he fought dirty. They crashed into the wall, grappling for control of his gun. He got his hand around her throat, squeezing, his face twisted with rage. Black spots danced in Nyla's vision. She drove her knee into his injured shoulder, felt him howl. His grip loosened just enough. She twisted, broke his hold, and drove her palm into his nose with enough force to shatter cartilage. Blood exploded across his face. And then Min-Jae was there, pulling Kang away from her, his face a mask of cold fury. "My turn, brother." What happened next was brutal and efficient. Min-Jae's fists struck like hammers, each blow calculated to cause maximum pain. He was bleeding heavily from his torn wound, his shirt soaked, but he didn't stop, didn't slow. This was 3 years of betrayal, of lies, of violated trust being paid back in blood. When Kang finally collapsed, barely conscious, Min-Jae stood over him. "You're done. Your operations, your men, your life, all of it. Done." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Min-Jae turned to Nyla. "We need to go, now." They ran, Soo-jin supported between them, racing through back alleys and side streets. Min-Jae's men picked them up 3 blocks away in a nondescript van. As they sped away from the casino, fire erupting behind them, as someone torched the evidence, Nyla finally let herself breathe. Soo-jin was crying quietly, her face buried in her brother's shoulder. Min-Jae held her with one arm, his other hand pressed to his reopened wound, his face grey with blood loss. "Hospital," Nyla ordered. This time, no arguments. Min-Jae looked at her and something passed between them, recognition, respect, something deeper that neither was ready to name. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for keeping your promise." "We're not done yet," she replied, but what she meant was we're not done with each other. Back at the mansion, after the hospital visit and the police bribes and the cleanup, Nyla found herself in Min-Jae's office at 3 in the morning. He was supposed to be resting, but of course he wasn't. He stood by the windows, staring out at the city, his torso wrapped in fresh bandages. "Kang's men are scattering," he said without turning. "Words spreading about what happened. The Russians are backing off. For now, it's over." "And Soo-jin?" "Safe. I'm sending her to Seoul to stay with family until things settle." He finally turned to face her. "You saved her life tonight. You saved mine twice now. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to repay that kind of debt." Nyla crossed her arms. "Tell me the truth, all of it, about my father." So he did. He told her about David Reyes showing up in Koreatown 3 years ago, desperate and dangerous with his stolen military secrets. How Min-Jae had wanted to turn him over to federal authorities, to wash his hands of the whole mess. How Kang had convinced him to at least hear what the man had to offer. And how, when Min-Jae had ultimately decided it was too risky, Kang had taken matters into his own hands. "I gave the order to let him go," Min-Jae said, his voice heavy, "to put him on a plane back to Korea and forget we ever met him. But Kang saw an opportunity, information he could sell, a scapegoat he could use against me later. Your father died because Kang was playing chess and I was too blind to see it." Nyla absorbed this, feeling the foundations of her rage crumbling. Min-Jae wasn't blameless. His world, his choices, his empire had created the circumstances that killed her father. But he wasn't the villain she'd imagined either. "So what now?" she asked. "You go back to running your empire and I just... What, keep pretending to be a maid?" Min-Jae moved closer, each step deliberate. "I have a better idea. You stay, not as a maid, as my personal security, my shadow, the one person I know I can trust, because you've already had 2 chances to kill me and didn't." "That's a hell of a job offer. It's a hell of a job." He was close enough now that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the pain he was hiding, the vulnerability he showed no one else. "But I think you're suited for it." Nyla should have said no, should have walked away from this world of blood and bullets and moral grey areas. But standing there, looking into the eyes of a man who'd become far more complicated than enemy or ally, she found herself nodding. "Temporary," she said. until I figure out what I really want. Temporary, he agreed, but they both knew it was a lie. Because what was growing between them, this dangerous attraction built on violence and trust and shared trauma, was anything but temporary. It was the kind of connection that would either save them both or destroy them completely. And neither of them knew which yet. Over the next 6 weeks, Nyla became something she'd never imagined, Min-Jae Kim's most trusted weapon. She traded her maid's uniform for tactical gear and tailored suits, depending on the situation. She learned the intricacies of his empire, sat in on meetings where millions changed hands with handshakes, watched him navigate the delicate balance between legitimate business and the underground world that funded it all. And she watched him, really watched him. Min-Jae was ruthless in business, cold in negotiations, unforgiving with enemies. But she also saw the way he personally paid for Mrs. Choi's grandson's surgery, the way he quietly funded a shelter for trafficking victims in Koreatown, the way he enforced a strict code among his men. No civilians, no children, no unnecessary violence. He was a criminal, yes, but one with lines he wouldn't cross. It confused her, made her question everything she'd believed about justice and morality and the clean lines between good and evil. What confused her more was the electricity that sparked every time they were alone together. It happened in small moments at first. His hand steadying her during a tense meeting, her fingers brushing his when she changed his bandages. The way his eyes tracked her across a room, dark and hungry. The way her pulse jumped when he stood too close. They were playing with fire and they both knew it. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Min-Jae had been invited to a charity gala at the Beverly Hilton, one of those events where LA's elite laundered their reputations with champagne and checkbooks. He needed to maintain his cover as a legitimate businessman, which meant appearing respectable, unthreatening, socialized. "You're coming with me," he'd said that afternoon, not asking. "As what, your bodyguard? That'll look subtle." "As my date." His expression was unreadable. "I need someone who can watch my back and look like they belong in that world. You're qualified for both." So Nyla found herself in a designer dress that cost more than she used to make in 6 months, her hair styled in elegant waves, makeup that made her look like someone else entirely. When she came downstairs, Min-Jae stopped mid-conversation with one of his lieutenants, his eyes widening fractionally. "You clean up well," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "So do you." And he did. The tuxedo fit him like it was born there, emphasizing his broad shoulders and lean build. The scar on his jaw only made him more striking, dangerous and refined all at once. The gala was everything Nyla expected and hated: excessive wealth on parade, fake smiles, conversations about nothing. But Min-Jae navigated it with practiced ease, charming donors, making connections, playing the part of the reformed immigrant success story. And she played her role too, the educated, sophisticated date who smiled at the right moments and said nothing controversial. But underneath the performance, tension coiled. His hand on the small of her back burned through the thin fabric. When they danced, his body against hers sent electricity racing through her veins. She could feel his heartbeat, fast and hard, matching her own. "You're good at this," he murmured against her ear as they moved across the floor. "The acting." "I had a good teacher. You wear masks so well I almost believe them." "Maybe they're not all masks." His hand tightened at her waist. "Maybe some parts are real." Before she could respond, one of Min-Jae's contacts approached, a Russian named Dmitri, cousin to the men who'd ambushed him weeks ago. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. "Kim," Dmitri said, his accent thick, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I heard about your troubles with Kang. Unfortunate business. Ancient history." Min-Jae's voice was cool, controlled. "I hope your family isn't holding grudges. That would be bad for everyone. My family believes in balance. You killed 3 of ours. That requires compensation." Nyla felt Min-Jae tense beside her. This was a threat wrapped in politeness, a declaration of war in a ballroom full of witnesses. She scanned the room automatically, marking exits, potential weapons, hostile actors. 2 more Russians near the bar, 1 by the terrace doors. "Then perhaps we should discuss terms," Min-Jae said smoothly. somewhere more private. They ended up on a balcony overlooking the city, Dmitri flanked by his men, Min-Jae with only Nyla beside him. The odds were bad, the situation worse. One wrong word and this would turn into a bloodbath. "We want Koreatown east of Vermont," Dmitri said, dropping all pretense. "That's the price for peace. Refuse, and we'll take it anyway, along with everything else you have." Min-Jae's jaw tightened. "That territory belongs to my family, has for 20 years. Your family is weak. Kang proved that. You're bleeding resources, losing men, fighting internal wars. We're offering you a way out. By surrendering everything I've built, by surviving." Dmitri's smile was cold. "Or we can do this the hard way, your choice." The silence stretched. Nyla could see Min-Jae calculating, weighing options. Koreatown east of Vermont was worth millions in revenue, protection rackets, legitimate businesses. Giving it up would be seen as weakness, would invite more challenges, more encroachment, but fighting would cost lives, resources, stability. "I'll need time to consider," Min-Jae finally said. "You have 48 hours. Dmitri turned to leave, then paused. "Nice dress, by the way," he said to Nyla. "Very convincing. Almost makes you forget she's special forces trained to kill men like us." He walked away laughing, his men following. When they were alone, Min-Jae's control finally cracked. He slammed his fist against the balcony railing hard enough to split his knuckles. "They've been watching, gathering information. They know about you, about Kang, about everything." His breathing was harsh, angry. "I've underestimated them. Again." Nyla caught his hand, examining the damage. "Then we stop underestimating. We gather our own information, find their weaknesses. And if we can't, we fight." She met his eyes. "You didn't build this empire by backing down. Don't start now." Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, respect, heat. "You know this path leads nowhere good. Staying with me means choosing violence, choosing this life. You could still walk away." "Could I?" The question was honest, raw. Because somewhere in the last 6 weeks, walking away had stopped being an option. Whether she'd fallen into Stockholm Syndrome, whether she'd lost herself in his darkness, or whether she'd simply found something real in the most unlikely place, she didn't know anymore. Min-Jae moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. "I don't want you to. Walk away, I mean. I should. You'd be safer, better off. But I'm not that noble." "Good." Nyla's hand covered his. "Because I'm not walking." He kissed her then, hard and desperate. Months of tension exploding into contact. She kissed him back with equal hunger, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his. It was wrong on every level. He was a criminal. She'd come here to destroy him. This was built on blood and lies and broken trust, but it felt inevitable, like gravity, like fate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Min-Jae rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything. I know. If you're mine, you become a target. Everyone I've ever wronged will try to hurt me through you. Then teach me how to survive in your world." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Make me your partner, not just your shadow. Let me be what I actually am, a warrior, not decoration." Min-Jae studied her for a long moment, and she could see the war in his expression. Protection versus respect. Control versus partnership. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but we do this my way. You learn the rules, the players, the game. No heroics, no shortcuts. This world is more dangerous than any combat zone because the enemies wear friendly faces. Deal." They left the gala early, drove back to the mansion in charged silence. When they got to his quarters, he pulled her inside and locked the door. What happened next was inevitable, explosive, the release of weeks of tension. He was demanding but careful, dominant but attentive, and she met him with equal intensity. They came together like a collision, all heat and need and desperation. Afterward, lying in the tangled silk sheets, Nyla traced the scars on his chest, bullet wounds, knife marks, the evidence of a violent life. "Tell me about your brother," she said quietly. Min-Jae stiffened. Why? Because he's the reason you do all of this. The reason you can't let go, can't step back. I want to understand. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he started talking, his voice low and rough. His name was Jin Ho. He was 5 years older, smarter, better at everything. Our parents died when I was 16. Car accident. Jin Ho stepped up, took over the family business, made sure I finished school. He built this empire from almost nothing, turned our father's small protection operation into something powerful. What happened to him? Rival gang. He was negotiating a truce, went in good faith. They shot him in the street like a dog. Min-Jae's jaw clenched. I was 22. He made me promise as he died, protect the family, protect what we built, never let them see us as weak. So I became what he needed me to be, ruthless, cold, unbreakable. And Soo-jin? She was just a kid when Jin Ho died, 12 years old, terrified. I raised her, kept her separate from this world as much as I could. She's the only good thing left from before. He looked at Nyla. Until you. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Nyla didn't know how to respond, so she just held him, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow into sleep. But she didn't sleep. She lay there thinking about choices and consequences, about how she'd come here for revenge, and found something far more complicated, about how loving a criminal didn't make you less guilty, and how hate could transform into something else entirely if you weren't careful. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Min-Jae's phone buzzed at dawn, one of his lieutenants with urgent news. The Russians had moved during the night, hitting 3 of his businesses in coordinated attacks. Warehouses burned, money stolen, 2 men dead. The 48-hour deadline had been a lie. The war had already started. Min-Jae moved through the mansion like a storm, barking orders in Korean, mobilizing his forces. Nyla suited up in tactical gear, checked her weapons, prepared for battle. Whatever line she'd been walking between observer and participant, she'd just crossed it. We hit back tonight, Min-Jae said, gathering his core team in the office. Hard and precise. They want war. We'll give them one they can't win. The target was a Russian weapons depot in Long Beach, 60 million in illegal arms, their main supply for the LA operation. Min-Jae's intel said it was guarded but not impregnable. A fast strike, steal the weapons, burn the rest. Cripple their operation before they could fully mobilize. I'm coming, Nyla said, leaving no room for argument. Min-Jae looked at her, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, acceptance. Stay close to me. Watch the exits. These men fight dirty. They rolled out at midnight, 4 SUVs filled with armed men, Min-Jae and Nyla in the lead vehicle. The depot was an old shipping warehouse isolated at the edge of the port district, surrounded by container yards and empty lots. Perfect for a firefight. The assault was fast and brutal. Min-Jae's men moved with military precision, breaching doors, clearing rooms, engaging the Russian guards with overwhelming force. Nyla moved through it like she was back in the field, her training overriding everything else. She covered Min-Jae's 6, dropped 2 guards who tried to flank them, secured a hallway while the team pushed forward. They found the weapons cache in the main storage area, crates of assault rifles, ammunition, explosives. Enough firepower to start a small war. Min-Jae's men began loading the most valuable pieces into trucks, while rigging the rest to burn. That's when the trap sprung. Lights flooded the warehouse, doors slammed shut, and Dimitri's voice echoed over a speaker system, amused and cold. Did you really think it would be this easy, Kim? We've been waiting for you. Russian reinforcements poured in from hidden positions. 20, 30 men, heavily armed, coordinating their assault. Min-Jae's team was outnumbered, pinned down, the exit routes sealed. Fall back to the south wall, Min-Jae shouted, returning fire. Move! The retreat was chaos. Bullets tore through the air, ricocheting off metal containers, punching through wooden crates. Nyla stayed beside Min-Jae, providing covering fire, pulling wounded men to safety. One of his lieutenants went down, blood spreading across his chest. Another took a round to the leg. They made it to a defensive position behind a wall of shipping containers, but they were trapped, outnumbered, outgunned, running out of ammunition. Min-Jae met Nyla's eyes. "There's a fire exit behind us through the maintenance corridor. Get the men out. I'll hold here. Buy you time." "Absolutely not." She reloaded her weapon. "We leave together or not at all." "Nyla, don't." She grabbed his vest, pulled him close. "You told me to be your partner. Partners don't abandon each other, so find another plan." For a heartbeat she saw frustration, fear, something that might have been love flash across his face. Then his expression hardened into determination. "Okay, new plan. We blow a hole in the south wall, use the confusion to escape through the container yard. It's risky. Everything we do is risky." She smiled grimly. "Let's do it." They used the last of the C4 charges meant for the weapons cache, shaped the explosive against the corrugated steel wall, set a 30-second fuse. When it blew, the blast was deafening, tearing a man-sized hole through the building's side. "Go, go, go!" Min-Jae shoved his men through the gap, returning fire to cover their retreat. Nyla was the last one out before him, turning back to make sure he followed. She saw the Russian round hit him before she heard the shot. Min-Jae jerked, stumbled, blood blooming across his shoulder. He kept moving, kept shooting, but she saw the pain in his face. Nyla grabbed his good arm and pulled him through the hole, just as a hail of bullets chewed through the space where he'd been standing. They ran through the container yard, using the massive steel boxes as cover, Min-Jae's men providing suppressing fire. Behind them, secondary explosions ripped through the warehouse as the weapons caught fire. They piled into the remaining SUVs and burned rubber getting out of there, sirens already wailing in the distance. In the back seat, Nyla tore open Min-Jae's jacket, assessing the damage. Through and through in the shoulder, high enough to miss anything vital but bleeding heavily. "You're okay," she said, more to convince herself than him. "You're okay." Min-Jae's hand found hers, squeezed. "Because of you." His eyes were hazy with pain but focused on her face. "You saved me again. That's becoming a habit. Good habit." His smile was weak but real. Then his eyes closed, and he passed out from blood loss. Nyla held pressure on the wound and gave terse orders to the driver. They couldn't go to a hospital. Too many questions, too much exposure. But she knew someone who could help. A former military doctor who ran a clinic for undocumented workers and asked no questions. As they raced through the LA night, emergency lights reflected in the windows, Min-Jae's blood warm on her hands, Nyla finally understood what she'd become. Not the avenging daughter, not the infiltrator, not even the temporary ally. She'd become Min-Jae Kim's partner, his protector, his lover. She'd crossed into his darkness and found she could navigate it, thrive in it even. And that terrified her more than any bullet ever could. Because there was no going back now. She was in this, in him, in this life, completely. And when war came, and it would come, she'd fight beside him until the end. Whatever that end might be. Min-Jae's recovery took 3 days. 3 days holed up in the clinic, while his empire burned around them. The Russians pressed their advantage, hitting more businesses, recruiting his disillusioned men, spreading word that the Black Dragon was wounded and weak. Every hour that passed, Min-Jae lost ground. On the 3rd night, he insisted on leaving despite the doctor's protests. "I can't hide while they destroy everything," he said, his jaw set. "Either I fight back now or there's nothing left to fight for." Back at the mansion, his remaining lieutenants gathered for a war council. The mood was grim. They'd lost a quarter of their territory, half their revenue streams, and too many good men. The Russians smelled blood and were circling for the kill. "We need to negotiate," one of the older lieutenants said. "Give them what they want before they take everything." "No," Min-Jae's voice cut through the room like a blade. "The moment we show weakness, we're finished. Not just with the Russians, with everyone. The Chinese, the Mexicans, every crew that's been waiting for an opening. We negotiate from strength or we don't negotiate at all." "What strength?" another lieutenant challenged. "They outnumber us, outgun us. We're barely holding Koreatown Central. One more push and then we make sure that push never comes." Nyla stepped forward, spreading surveillance photos across the table. She'd spent the last 3 days doing her own reconnaissance, using her military training to gather intelligence while Min-Jae recovered. Dimitri's getting cocky. He's been spending nights at a club in West Hollywood. Minimal security, predictable schedule. If we take him out, the Russian operation loses its head. They'll fracture, fight among themselves over succession. Buys us time to rebuild." The lieutenants exchanged glances. "That's a suicide mission," one said. "His men will tear us apart." "Not if we're smart." Nyla pulled up blueprints of the club. "There's a service entrance here, connects to the building's underground parking. We go in small, 3 people, during business hours when the club is packed with civilians. He won't expect a hit in front of witnesses. We get to him, eliminate him quietly, extract through the parking garage. 3 people against his entire security team. 3 of the right people." Nyla looked at Min-Jae. "You, me, and 1 other. Someone who can drive and provide backup." Min-Jae studied the blueprints, and she could see his tactical mind working. "It's insane. It's the only play we have. They're expecting a frontal assault, a show of force. This is the opposite, surgical, precise, unexpected." She met his eyes. "Like you taught me. Play the game they don't see coming." Slowly, Min-Jae nodded. "Okay, we do it tomorrow night, but if this goes wrong, then we go wrong together," Nyla finished. The next evening, she dressed like she was going clubbing. Tight dress, heels, makeup that made her look like 1,000 other LA women hunting for a good time. Min-Jae wore designer casual, expensive but understated. Their third was a young Korean driver named Jin, the best wheelman in the organization, barely 23 but steady under pressure. The club was exactly what Nyla expected. Overpriced drinks, pounding music, beautiful people performing for each other. Dmitri held court in the VIP section on the 2nd level, surrounded by his men and a rotation of women who hung on his every word. Nyla and Min-Jae entered separately, meeting at the bar. She ordered something fruity and expensive while he nursed whiskey, both of them scanning the room, marking exits and threats. 4 of Dmitri's men visible on the main floor. 2 at the VIP entrance, unknown number in the section itself. "He's got a guard in the bathroom," Nyla murmured. "Close enough to Min-Jae that anyone watching would think they were flirting. Rotates every 30 minutes. Next switch is in 5. You take point, I'll cover." His hand found hers under the bar, squeezed once. "Be careful." "Always am." She made her move during the guard rotation, slipping into the hallway that led to the bathrooms and private rooms. The guard was just leaving his post, and she smiled at him. Tipsy girl looking for the restroom, nothing threatening. He barely glanced at her. The private room was unlocked. Nyla entered like she belonged there, scanning quickly. Couch, table, bar setup, door leading to a back stairwell. Perfect. She hid behind the door and waited. 2 minutes later, Dmitri entered, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Russian. He was alone. Exactly what they'd hoped. The VIP section was crowded enough that he'd wanted privacy for his call. Nyla moved fast and silent, the combat knife appearing in her hand like magic. She had the blade to his throat before he could react, her other hand covering his mouth. "Make a sound and you die," she whispered. "Nod if you understand." Dmitri nodded, his eyes wide with shock and fury. She could feel his muscles coiling, preparing to fight. But then Min-Jae entered through the back stairwell, his gun equipped with a suppressor, pointed directly at the Russian's head. "We can do this quietly," Min-Jae said, his voice cold as winter. "Or we can paint these walls with your brain. Your choice." Dmitri's body went still. Nyla felt his calculation, the odds, the angles, the possibility of survival. She increased pressure on the blade just enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Why?" Dmitri finally managed. "You're already beaten. That's what you think. That's what you were supposed to think." Min-Jae moved closer. "But here's the truth. I let you think you were winning. Let you get overconfident. Spread your forces thin, chasing my territory. And now you're alone, surrounded, about to die in a nightclub bathroom. How's that for beaten? Your men will tear each other apart fighting over your empire. I know how your organization works. 5 different factions, 3 of them who hate each other. Without you holding them together, they'll fracture within a week." Min-Jae's smile was vicious. "So here's what happens next. You call off your war, all of it. You retreat from Koreatown, return what you stole, and we both walk away alive. Or I kill you now, and your entire operation collapses into civil war. Choose." Dmitri's eyes flickered between them, calculating odds he didn't like. Finally, his shoulders sagged. "How do I know you won't kill me anyway? Because I'm not you. I keep my word when people are smart enough to deal fairly." Min-Jae lowered his gun fractionally. "Do we have an agreement?" It took another 30 seconds of tense silence, but finally Dimitri nodded. Nyla removed her blade carefully, stepping back but keeping it ready. The Russian touched his throat, looked at the blood on his fingers. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," Min-Jae corrected. "Tell yourself whatever story you need, but you lost the moment you underestimated me. Learn from it." They left him there, slipping out through the back stairwell, down through the parking garage where Jin waited with the engine running. As they pulled away from the club, no alarms, no pursuit, Nyla finally allowed herself to breathe. "You think he'll honor the deal?" she asked. "He will, because he knows I'm crazy enough to start a war that destroys both our organizations if he doesn't." Min-Jae looked at her, and there was something unguarded in his expression. "You were right. The play he didn't see coming. We make a good team. The best." Over the next weeks, Dimitri kept his word. The Russian forces withdrew from Koreatown, returned most of the stolen assets, retreated to their traditional territories. Face was saved on both sides. Neither had been destroyed. Both could claim strategic victory to their people. But everyone in the underworld knew the truth. Min-Jae Kim had beaten back a superior force through intelligence and ruthlessness. His reputation solidified. Men who'd been wavering returned to the fold. New recruits sought him out. The Black Dragon Empire rebuilt stronger than before. And through it all, Nyla remained at his side, not as shadow or subordinate, but as equal partner. She attended meetings, offered strategic advice, personally handled security for high-stakes negotiations. The whispers started, about the mysterious woman who'd tamed the untamable Kim, about the soldier-turned-lover who was as dangerous as he was. Nyla found she didn't mind the whispers. She'd made her choice, accepted the consequences. This life, this man, this darkness, it fit her better than she'd ever imagined. 3 months after the Russian war ended, Min-Jae took her to a house in the Malibu Hills. It was smaller than the Koreatown mansion, more private, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sunset painted everything gold and crimson. "What is this?" she asked. "Somewhere safe, somewhere away from the business, from the violence, from all of it." He turned to face her. "I bought it for us. For when you need to remember there's more to life than blood and bullets." Nyla felt something crack open in her chest. "Min-Jae, I know what I am, what this life costs, and I know I have no right to ask you for forever when I can't promise we'll both survive the year." He took her hands. "But I'm asking anyway, stay with me. Not because you're useful, not because of revenge or obligation. Stay because you choose this. Choose me." She should have hesitated, should have thought it through, weighed consequences, considered alternatives. But standing there with the ocean wind in her hair and this complicated, dangerous, impossibly compelling man looking at her like she was his salvation, there was only one answer. "I choose you," she said. "Whatever that means. Whatever comes, I choose this." He kissed her as the sun set, soft and fierce and full of unspoken promises. And for the first time since her father died, Nyla felt something other than rage. She felt hope. The years that followed weren't easy. There were more wars, more betrayals, more nights where survival seemed impossible. The DEA investigated, got close, but never quite close enough. Rival gangs rose and fell. Min-Jae's empire evolved, shifting toward legitimate businesses while maintaining enough underground operations to stay powerful. Through it all, Nyla was his constant. She became known in the underworld as the Blade, the woman who could heal you or kill you with equal efficiency. Men feared her, women respected her, and Min-Jae loved her with an intensity that bordered on obsession. 4 years after that night in the conference room, they married in a small ceremony on a beach in Korea, Soo-jin and Mrs. Choi the only witnesses. It wasn't legal, too many complications with Nyla's past with their respective enemies, but it was real, a promise made and kept. 5 years after that, the world shifted again. New threats emerged. Chinese triads moving into California, cartels expanding from the south, technology making the old ways obsolete. Min-Jae adapted, always 3 steps ahead, always calculating. But he also stepped back, delegating more, spending more time in Malibu, more time with Nyla. They talked about leaving sometimes, retiring completely, disappearing somewhere no one knew their names. But they both knew the truth. This life didn't let people go. You stayed in the game until it killed you, or you died in different ways, withering from boredom and irrelevance. So they found balance. Violence when necessary, peace when possible, and always, always together. Now 7 years after Nyla had walked into his life with revenge in her heart, she stood in their Malibu bedroom while Min-Jae slept. He'd been hurt again. Knife wound from a negotiation gone wrong, nothing serious but enough to need care. She'd stitched him up with practiced efficiency, the same way she'd done that very first night. Some things never changed. Rain drummed against the windows, the storm turning the ocean savage and beautiful. Nyla locked the bedroom door out of habit, retrieved her medical kit from the closet, checked his bandages one more time. His breathing was steady, peaceful. The scar on his jaw had faded, but never quite disappeared. A reminder that they were both survivors, marked by violence but not defined by it. Her phone buzzed, a message from one of their contacts. Chinese triads making moves in Long Beach. A new player named Zhang who didn't respect the old boundaries. Another war possibly brewing on the horizon. Nyla deleted the message. She'd deal with it tomorrow. Tonight was for this. For peace. For the man she'd chosen. For the complicated love they'd built from blood and bullets and broken promises. She set the medical kit on the nightstand and climbed into bed beside him. Min-Jae stirred, his arm automatically pulling her close even in sleep. Safe. Protected. Home. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, they had this moment of calm. And when morning came, when the next threat emerged, when violence inevitably called them back, they'd face it together. Partners, lovers, equals in the darkness, just as they always had. Just as they always would. Nyla closed her eyes against Min-Jae's chest, listening to his heartbeat. Strong, steady, alive. She smiled in the darkness, predatory and content all at once. Time to heal, love, she thought. And then time to fight again, because this was their life now, their choice, their war, and they wouldn't have it any other way.